Welcome YouTube, it's Chobra, and we are back with another episode of What Would Chobra Do, Nongshim Red Force Edition. And we're getting ready for the last match of regulation in Stage 1 for Nongshim, which is going to be up against ZETA Division. Now, if you haven't been following the league, you might be thinking, it's ZETA, how hard could it possibly be, especially when you're Nongshim Red Force? You can just run at full speed and you should be able to take the game. That might have been true in the past, but surprise, surprise, ZETA's actually been making some big improvements throughout Stage 1. And while it has been kind of incremental this past week in their match against Talon Esports, with the addition of 1010 stepping in place of Depp, who's out for an injury, they looked absolutely rejuvenated. So what's it going to take? Because I don't think it's going to be a free win. But at the same time, going back and looking at it, while I was very impressed during the live match, I think there are still some good patterns that you can identify against ZETA to really break things apart. So let's take a look at a couple examples rounds on the maps that they played on Lotus and Split, because I do think this will be somewhat applicable onto the other maps potentially as well. Now, before we jump in, just as an overview, so what has changed for ZETA Division? Well, they've identified that they can't actually just sit around for the first full minute and then decide to play the round afterwards because they're lacking all the information. They finally figured that out. It's taken a couple of years, but what's important is that they did improve on that, and they've been changing that up week by week. But in this match against Talon, what we'll notice is that they are very, very proactive, especially on the defense. They're constantly pushing out and erasing aspects, and the reason they need to do this is because what we'll see on both Lotus and Split is that their defense very largely relies on a lot of different trap plays. It relies on trap plays, it relies on crossfires, and that all sounds very fundamental, but there's a slight difference between pushing out and aggressively taking the initiative to take duels versus, hey, we need this information so we can set up for our trap plays, which then tells us that there is still a bit of a flow chart that goes through here for ZETA. We will take a look at a couple attacking rounds as well. Now, I would say the attack is also very much improved, but it does seem like their focus is much more on like, hey, we just need X number of rounds in attack, and the defense is where we shine. So let's take a look at defense. How do you get certain tells? How do you make sure that, especially if they're playing something like the Vice, which is notorious for just buying time, especially since you can't break the shear wall, how do you identify exactly where it's set up? Because normally it's set up on C site, but as we can see right now on the minimap, the Vice is over here on the A side, right? The setup, the Vice agent themselves, which obviously Vice doesn't need to be because all of her util is global, but they have the shear wall over here. They've got vines, they've got flash, everything's on the A side. So how do you identify when it's on the A side? And sometimes they do this weird shear wall that's like deeper in to kind of trap you in further out. So, how do you identify when that's happening? Well, there's a couple things that you'll note. So if we go back to the beginning of this round, what we see is that they have a Sova, ISO, Neon, and Omen, all agents which are pretty decent at fighting Rubble early on. But early on, there is nothing that comes out on the A side. There is no Recon, there is no Paranoia, there is no Relay Bolt, there's no Fast Lane, there's nothing. There's no smoke on this side. In fact, a one-way is going to be used over by Sugar Zero onto the C side mound fight. So that is a pretty big tell that, okay, they're fine giving up Rubble, which would imply that they are looking to buy time here on this round. So the very next round, this is one of the rounds where we are going to see ZETA fight for Rubble control, and they're going to be over here on the A side. In round 7, you've got 4 people lined up. You got Vice with a very typical C side setup. You've got an extra Razor Vines over here on B. And what you will see is, even though the Omen is going to put up a one-way here, that's not the tell. That is not what you're looking for. What you're looking for is what's being used over by Rubble. And so if we play out this round, what you're going to immediately see is that there's going to be a Recon and the wall, right? You can see that the ISO has used up their wall. If you look at the small screen on your lower right, the contingency has been used up. So they're pushing up with the wall. One way goes up over towards C side, but furthermore, the Recon lands right behind Rubble. So big push out just to confirm that they can push out. The wall protects them from any, crossfire or anything like that. Relay Bolt's not used, and Paranoia is not used, but that's because they're not really getting any pings. There are, I think 1 or 2 rounds later on where they will actually use the Paranoia to counterfight against Rubble. So, they don't have a raise or anything like that. You don't have the Tejo, so ZETA's not looking to aggressively take Rubble first no matter what, but they have these ideas where they're like, okay, we want to push out here so we can plant our typical lurk onto the Rubble and then move away from that. So basically what you want to look out for is there a recon? Is there a contingency, right? Does that indicate that there's more than one person and they're fishing for information here? if that happens, there's a good chance that Vice is on C. Then you can work on taking out the sheer wall early, and then you can re-clear this right around the 40-second to minute mark, which gives you now an option to push into C site without further delay, or continue on towards A, depending on how the rest of the round has panned out. I do want to note that they do have a slight variation towards the end of the half on round 11, where they'll actually use the recon over towards rubble, but there will be no contingency wall, and they actually planted the Vice onto the A site. So they made it look like, hey, we want to take rubble control, etc., but there wasn't actually any commitment, right? Because the recon gets information, but there's no follow-up because there's no wall, there's no relay bolt or anything like that. So there are going to be switch-ups, which indicates that ZETA definitely has improved. It's not just that they're just following a game plan that was set the night before. They are trying to adapt to things, but you can start to pick up on these tells for sure. Now, another round I want to be taking a look at is going to be round 12, and this indicates that ZETA has now learned the importance of having multiple angles. Now, whether it's for crossfires or whether it's for util, it doesn't matter, because if they're given that angle, they will look for it. So this is during a retake, as you can tell on the minimap, ZETA on the defense, and they already have taken over Waterfall, right? The spike is looking to get planted. It has not been planted yet, and Talon has taken over the C site. So what is ZETA looking to do? Well, they want to fight this because they are lower numbers. They want to fight it either as the spike's being planted or as Talon's trying to get set up. You do not want Talon to get set up ahead of time. Thankfully, they're able to get right up close to the site. So I'm going to zoom out here, and we're going to play it out, and then we'll talk about the round.
Salvo's not going to be online for Cruz just yet, but the team wants to go in. Oh, 10-10, what a peak. Sugar Zero as well, and all of a sudden, Talon find themselves...
Yeah, it's pretty swift and quick. So let's rewind and think about exactly what happened here. So what's going to be important is that you have the Neon who's just watching, right, to see if there's anybody lined up here. You get pretty good vision. But then afterwards, the Silva and Omer are going to set up, and they'll throw a recon towards the back wall, and then they'll throw a paranoia to make sure the Neon can actually rush forward without getting cut off from any sort of far sight line. And so if you play this out again, they creep up, they're set up, the recon bolt goes out, paranoia to cut close, so that they can start to peek out together, and then the Neon creates a distraction, and then you create a crossfire. And during this, if you look, instead of just pinching the obvious route, they've already cleared out 3 here, so they actually wrap back around to make sure they can do another pinch onto the remaining opponents. ZETA has gotten very good at this, at always creating a pinch, always creating a secondary angle. They're no longer just barreling through, they're no longer just taking one-on-ones, so you always have to kind of second guess and be like, okay, well, if I see one guy there, where's the other guy? Like, if I see 2 guys over here, where's the other guy? You always have to keep that in mind. Now, in the heat of the moment, you're not going to be sitting there like pausing every second and being like, okay, well, so what's going on here? You don't have that leisure, but it is something you want to just keep in the back of your mind. But the other important thing to note here is that there are still inklings of just classic Japanese style Valorant, where if they are able to get right up to the line of scrimmage, right, like literally right up to the doorstep of wherever they want to attack, then they're going to have these set plays, right? They're going to have the util usage. They're going to have double angles. So what does that mean? Generally, you do quickly want to be able to push out and not, don't overheat, but just delay that. This is something that Nongshim Red Force was very good at when they were playing against Riddle Order last year at Ascension, because Riddle was also very good at that, where if they were allowed to creep up to the site, I mean, they would be just drilled in and covering for each other. The util was clear, etc. But you just delay that. You break the timing a little bit. You force them to get a little bit offbeat. I'm not saying you should go out all the way, right, Domby? Don't get a red card from Sliggy. Don't do that anymore. But I'm just saying, don't let them get this for entirely free, because then they'll set up and play on their own terms. Now, just briefly, we were also mentioning how, they're constantly looking at these extra pinches, even in a small fight like that. Well, let's look at how it plays out in a overall round. You see ZETA crashing into the A site. They're creating a distraction. Meanwhile, the main force is going over to B. There's still 55 seconds left, by the way, at this point. And so they go for the taps. They drop the util. They're like, okay, well, the Tejo's here. So we don't know what we want to do with that. We have no information on Waterfall. We have backed off. We were trying to see if there is any sort of push out from A. There isn't, but they kept tapping a couple of times. If you listen, the audio continues to just go for that beep, trying to bait out more util. They set up the Vice Flash so they can now get information on B, and they loop back around. They still leave Shota here, by the way, for the extra flank. He should be getting a kill onto the Tejo sometime soon, but they will be going into the A side. And look at where 10-10 is going. This is still a 5v5, by the way, and he's still making sure that they can get another flank. Luckily for them, they actually win out the fight in the site. But basically what this means is that now that you've won that fight, Shota has an easier time because you are outnumbering them. So you can get a little bit more aggressive, right? Once he gets that kill, now 10-10 is able to get a little bit more aggressive and go for another wraparound, which he does. In fact, it's a little crazy because it is a 3v2. You're all kind of separated. But, you know, he's jumping jollily. He goes in for the duel and actually wins that. And they are allowed to keep the numbers advantage. So what you want to notice here for ZETA is that if they have the numbers advantage, that is actually when they will constantly kind of go for these, what I would like to call like a solo queue snowball, right? You're expecting the opponents to play like you. Oh, they're going to create another angle. They're going to come from all these different angles and flanks. So we got to cut that off nice and early. Once you have the numbers advantage, it's like, okay, well, if I overheat and I die, we're still even. So it's not too bad. And then they start to snowball that again and again and again. There's always someone from another angle, from hitting you from behind again. And then you turn around and they're behind you again. ZETA Division has gotten very good at this. They've gotten very good at holding off angles as well. There's an earlier round, I think the first time they get the op, 10-10's holding the op from Baby Door here, from Blue Room. And then Shota covers from here through the smoke. So there's always someone extra. All right. That's very important for Nongshim to remember because you can break through this with the extra speed, but that means that when you throw Dombi in, you gotta have extra cover as well. There will be someone that is going to wrap out of a smoke around the corner, come out, you know, after the utils run out, something like that, to go for the trades. Now let's move on and talk about split. And this isn't anything macro related, but you know, just something that we have to be aware that they are doing is going to be in the post plant here. If you look at the mini map, you see the Viper running all the way up. Shota. He runs all the way up, and you see the Poison Cloud go out, and this Poison Cloud is absolutely just damning here against Talon, because not only does it serve its purpose, if you look closely on the minimap, it's going to be right on the spike. So it serves the purpose of, obviously, the decay, and so that allows you to spam easier. But what it's going to do is it's going to create a nasty angle for Sugar Zero, who's holding in back sight. So they see them starting to run through. He gets paranoid. You put up the Poison Cloud, and now he's tucked right behind the smoke. And that creates a different off angle, not one that you're used to clearing when you're trying to clear the double peak coming onto that site. So it gets pretty rough here for Talon. That draws out enough time, and they should be able to win the round. So ZETA will be able to clean up that one. But that's just something to note, right? If you're going under the B side, if you see this Poison Cloud there, you just got to make sure that you're watching out for that off angle being held by whoever's, you know, hanging out back here. The very next round, we're going to have the Euro come out from 10-10, and he's going to run in, and look at him just clear the entire site. Nice and smooth, follows through, and then boom, there's the fault line. You know, there's the salvos that go even deeper, and while 10-10 doesn't get the kill, his teammates are able to come through because it feels pretty safe because you've already gotten the vision, there's nobody close by, and the fault line is able to clear that out. They do this again later on, I believe it's like round 11. Now what they do then is, okay, we've done this before, let's see what the reaction is. And Talon is actually going to respond at the very entrance into the site. So if we zoom into the mini map here, obviously this is still round 4, but Talon actually starts to set up here. So 10-10 runs into people right at the entrance. So what they do is they pivot, and they're already ready with a fault line close this time. They go for that fault line. They salvo here so that there can't be extra cover, and 10-10 comes out of the ultimate here so that you can have a pinch. So they haven't shown us, obviously, I'm sure they have things prepared, but they didn't feel the need to, you know, plant the idea that the Euro ult is always hitting B site and then using that as a fake, you know, for the gate crash over to A that T1 likes to do. We're not seeing that. It is really about, hey, let's set up for the frags. This is something that they've picked up on this stage, is let's set up for the frags. Let's get these trap plays, the set plays, things like that. And so if you see the Yoru, you have two options. Either what you can do is ignore the Yoru and make sure that there is extra cover, but just go for delay, right? Make sure you're not getting pinched. Throw a Paranoia out nice and early. Throw a Gravnet out nice and early. Just delay that and then set up so that you can get past the fault line, or then you can have extra people where you're kind of not both going to get stunned. Something like that. But the other option, quite frankly, is you could just make sure that you're not giving up all the space, right? You have the retake, and then clear mid, right? Because if they're going to go for a set play, just make sure you clear out the post plant, and then now you have a much stronger retake. So there are two different options here. I think the idea, what ZETA's current plan is good at, are the teams that are like, ignore the Yoru, fight the guys behind. Because then it's like, okay, well, the trap play might come close because it's a breach and they can adjust to it pretty quickly. So you don't want to get caught off guard there just trying to fight like right past the Yoru ult. But I think you can, buy time with the delay. I think the idea of like, hey, let's hide in the smoke and then cover them after the fact isn't going to work out very well because ZETA's set plays are very thorough right now. So again, just buying time and delaying, or saying, okay, just make sure they don't get past this. Maybe you even, like someone like the Omen baits out the fault line, then you TP out of the site. So that way the Yoru's not pushing all the way past here. And then you're able to just clear out mid, put some pressure there, and then you go for a cleaner retake. Now, overall, the attack doesn't go that well for ZETA Division, right? It's not like they suddenly had a huge lead in attack or anything like that, but something that they will rely on oftentimes, especially if you think about the composition and how they've been using it, right? The Taeho breach along with the Yoru, you can get easy information, then you can go for these trap plays. So Yoru jumps in, gets an early frag, things like that. How do you make that happen? Well, you make sure that there isn't easy backup. And one thing that ZETA will like to do is really target mid. They can take it pretty easily with things like the salvo, the aftershock, the fault line. You can see the salvos going out right now as well, and then the gate crash in. So it's pretty easy pickings. Now, what Talon decides to do is in this round, they kind of said, okay, well, we're actually giving up ramp for free too much, which is what they were doing in the past. So they say, okay, let's set up the operator in ramps, and let's just give up mid. Let's trap him in mid, and that's fine. That's a valid strategy on split. You still have the tripwire here to make sure that Primi knows if he needs to like push out or suddenly dash back through heaven. And then you have a stack over by B. All pretty good ideas, but what's going to happen is because it's a breach, ramps actually isn't a safe spot to be. You can't easily push out or relocate over on ramps. And also, in this one, very unfortunately, Primi is just going to get a leg shot, and he doesn't actually get the kill, which is very unfortunate. But again, it just goes to show that 10-10, because he's Euro, he can actually feel pretty safe here. You see the gate crash going backwards. So he has a way out. He's got a good lurk. He's going to be able to hide away. And then the drone comes in. He eventually breaks it. They know he's there, but it doesn't matter. So even if he had gotten the kill here, Primi's going to get traded, and then Heaven's open again anyway. So basically, all in all, ZETA, one of the things that they were best at, other than with the Euro ult on B, is actually taking space on Heaven, whether it's kind of for free through ramps or whether it's through mid and a pinch through ramps. So again, now you have two options. Well, do you want to like sit here because this is primed for fault lines and aftershocks and whatnot? Maybe not so much. So then you got to think, okay, if we give up Heaven, then we make sure that we have minimum 2, maybe 3 people, right? Like 2 on site, 1 on screens, or it's like 1-1 and then 1 on site here, something like that, where you can just trap them in Heaven and then make sure you have someone who has delay, whether it's like an Omen or another Sentinel, right? In the case of a double Sentinel comp, to delay them with a fast rotate into B. That has to be the option, because trying to like fight them and slow them down here without actually pushing out and using your util, I think is a bit of a death sentence, especially with a Viper on the other side. Now, one extra thing to note, ZETA oftentimes was using this toxic screen right here. A little bit of a weird one, because usually you want the toxic screen to allow you to go all the way into Heaven and a pivot to B pretty quickly at mass U crossing. That's all nice and dandy. So what purpose does this serve? Well, this toxic screen, for one, denies vision from here. It denies vision from ramps. So it kind of works like the double cyber cages from Cypher, where Cypher is able to mask this, and then say, all right, where could I be? Like, unless you guys have someone in ramps, you don't know if I'm all the way through in ramps. You don't know if I'm just hanging out, in this corner here. You don't know how many people have crossed. That's what this toxic screen serves. It's an interesting idea, but usually what that means for ZETA is they might use this to put pressure on, maybe a lurk from the Yoru or something like that, but they'll rarely actually use this for the attack. This round 6, is the only time they actually use this screen to go on an attack, but it's not so much the screen that they're using, it's this giant fault line that's going to let you know that they are going for an attack on A, and it's a pretty fast one. It's a fast hit, because otherwise it doesn't really hold that much value. So really, if you see this toxic screen, prepare for a bit of a rush, but otherwise, here's the thing. If you clear this either with util or when the screen is down, now it's free, because they can't actually control when they're peeking, because they don't have the original toxic screen. So you can hold an off angle and get the jump on them as they're trying to re-clear, or they'll have to use extra util, and that gives you a chance to back out. So honestly, disrespect this screen whenever you can, other than, obviously the first couple seconds of the round. So let's talk about defense. What do they do on defense? What makes it so good? Well, overall, first of all, this was a pretty close game. But one thing to note is that they have a timer. They have an internal timer, and I should actually zoom out here so you guys can see the time. But we're just going to skip forward a little bit. You know, Talon is prepping on the B side. Note that Zeta Division has not used their early util, right? They've used the fault line, but they haven't actually committed to a fight over here on A main. They are just holding, kind of similar to how Nongshim Red Force sometimes play this side of the map, and they are just waiting. And then now that they don't really have much information, what they will do is they'll wait. It's still 120. We still don't see anything. We're still holding mid. That's good. You still have the paranoia. We can delay on B. That's good. I've got support. I've got gate crash. That's good. We still have salvos. That's good. Fault line's going to come back. That's great. We have all the delay. And then right at the minute mark, 105, drone goes out. This is their timer, because on the pistol round, and what they do is Yoru on the minute mark, 10-10. Goes out on a little journey. He, in fact, goes all the way to sewers and gets a kill, which is a little criminal. But the minute mark, so unless they have some information that they are already reacting to, a minute mark is when they will erase usually the A side, not the B side, right? So either with a drone or with a Yoru who has a gate crash available. Now, especially if they're going for the drone and you're not seeing like a follow-up kill, probably means it's a bit of a stack on the other side, because why else would you be droning just for information if you're not going to take that space, right? If you don't really have any follow-up off of it. So that's something to note. Obviously, Talon just catches no vision of this, and they'll try to go for a strike here, but unfortunately, he gets out of his own smoke and he dies, and that gets delayed greatly. But it's just the minute mark that you want to watch out for. So I think what you can do with that is you can try to draw out some of that util earlier. So even if they get vision at the minute mark, you still have about, let's say, 20 seconds to do something. The other important part here with this composition is going to be the breach. XTLL is crucial because, again, they're relying on trap plays. The reason they want to erase this is so that they can have angles and set plays. You can delay once with the paranoia. Now we're ready to push out with a trap play or get set up with other, information on where they rotated to, and then we can shut them down. So if you can draw out the fault line early, right? Bait it out. If you're playing the neon, make some noise and run back out, sprint back out, something like that, and you trade that, now you have 40 seconds to strike without much other resistance. Obviously, in terms of delay, you still got things like the paranoia. You've got the salvos. You've got the snake bite. That's why it's good. But hey, Nongshim knows how to do that because they do that as well on defense. So this is something that Nongshim should know how to counteract. I'm not going to give all the details because that would be benefiting Zeta Division as well, but it's not the first time we're seeing this, guys. You can figure this out, but it's just something you want to be aware of, is that they're not actually playing this super aggressively. They are looking to be more reactive with trap plays, and they'll happily wait until the minute mark to get their first piece of information. Very old school. They're still active about it, but it is a bit of an old school timing. So I think that's something that Nongshim will have to watch out for. Last but not least, just to zoom back in on the minimap so you can see exactly what I'm talking about, is going to be the fact that Ramps is fairly weak with this composition, because you're looking to just delay with a toxic screen after the early pieces of util. Unless they have an operator, Ramps is fairly exploitable, so you can go for some pinches right mid to A onto heaven and then back to B, something like that. So that's an area that you can try to exploit. And then also note that there is no hard sentinel on this side, so fast hits can work as long as you don't dump all your util initially. Bait out that first delay and then immediately strike back with a counterattack, and that should give you a little bit of an edge. So, quite a few rounds that we went through. Every time I try to go through multiple rounds, it always ends up taking a little bit longer, but I just wanted to show as many examples because just talking wildly about, hey, they do this all the time, I don't think really serves a great purpose. But again, it's nothing new, but I think it is new for Zeta. But you just have to remember, okay, these guys are always looking to kind of counter attack, right? Especially on the defense. You see someone in an off angle, someone else peeks out from the other side. Like, they get information here, they delay, and then they strike back with a trap play. Over on Lotus, they love that seaside trap play on Mound, right? Where you're coming out from the rotating door and things like that. So as long as you're always aware of that and position yourself so you're not all getting hit by util, or it's just one person baiting out the util and then you strike back, now you have the advantage. So just know that if you can draw out the reactions from Zeta, which initially on each part of the map, it shouldn't be that hard because there's no reason for Zeta to try to overthink this right from the get-go. So try to get those reactions out. Once you see the patterns, then you start to adapt mid-game, but listen, I trust Francis. He's very, very good at that. He's very, very good at the mid-game IGLing, in my opinion. So I think Nongshim Red Force should have a pretty easy time. But yeah, those are the things to remember. Otherwise, obviously, 10-10, he's going to hold a lot of weird angles. He's willing to fight. They allow him to fight. They allow him to get a little over-aggressive. So watch out for that. And that should be it. Players to watch out for on the side of Zeta. I mean, everyone's obviously very good. Sugar Zero had a absolute life game in the last week. But in my opinion, I'm looking out for 10-10 and XDL. I think from a macro perspective, those two and the positions they hold and the information they get is oftentimes going to be much more crucial for this team. So that's just something I would be watching out for and see how you can counteract that. That's going to be it for this week's What Would Chobra Do? One game left in regulation. If Nongshim can win this, they are in the playoffs. And then, of course, depending on the permutations of other matches, as I've talked about in my last video, there's even a 0.07 odds that Nongshim can get first seed. So that's what we're rooting for because we're already pretty comfy that they're going to beat Zeta. And all I'm going to say is, Shota, you can call it whatever you want, but the brand itself is called Shinramyeon, so I hope you enjoy the spicy flavors being thrown at you this week. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, please leave a comment down below, subscribe to the channel, leave a like on the video, and I'll see you guys next time. Oh, and of course, come check out the live watch parties both here on YouTube and on Twitch. That's going to be it for this one. Have a nice one.